Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. My name is Victor Davila. I'm on the AIGA DEC Steering Committee, and on behalf of the whole team, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's AIGA DEC virtual event. As we are inviting or waiting for more people to trickle in because they keep popping into the waiting room, if you can go ahead and let us know two things. One, where you're joining us from. I'm joining us from Orlando, Florida. Which is sometimes the face of the sun, but today is not so bad. But we'd love to hear from where you're at. And also, for the sake of our communications team, if you can let us know exactly where it was that you heard about this particular event, it would really help our message, how we get the message out and all that stuff. So yeah, it's so good to see so many of you, so many friends. Did I see Allie Place's name pop up somewhere?
Yeah, I did see
DEC
her.
alumna.
Yeah.
What's up, Allie?
I made her come,
Good.
you know.
It's always good to see. So welcome, welcome.
James from BCFA is here too.
What's up, James?
Hi,
James.
How's it going, James?
Welcome, welcome. For a second there, I thought we were talking about Mr. Henderson.
The other Jimmy.
The other. All right, thank you. So I'll go ahead and get started. The AIGA DEC is part of AIGA, the Professional Organization for Design, and the DEC's mission is to enhance and support the abilities of design educators and educational institutions, whether K through 12, higher ed, or another kind of a design program, to prepare future designers for excellence in design practice, design theory, and design writing, while supporting the fundamental mission of AIGA of furthering creative excellence. Just as an FYI, if you haven't noticed already, this event will be recorded and will potentially be posted on the DEC YouTube channel. So if there's any information that you might have missed or want to go back to, please consider in a few weeks going back there and checking it out there. We have a great panel today for an all-important subject, which I wish I would have heard 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or whatever. But we'd like to welcome today's speakers. Jimmy Henderson is a designer and educator whose work focuses on illustration, packaging, street art, and the human experience. Currently an assistant professor of art and design as, here we go, Susquehanna?
Susquehanna.
Oh, almost.
So close.
University. His research and writing have been shared both nationally and internationally, and he is a connoisseur of cool baseball hats. Please welcome Jimmy Henderson.
Hi, everybody.
And we also have Heather Sander-Quinn, who's an assistant professor of design and civics and a civics fellow at DePaul University and a 2024 Illinois Science and Tech Coalition researcher to know. Her work uses design fiction to empower communities to imagine possible futures and understand technology's impact on human freedoms. Please welcome Heather Sander-Quinn.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Thanks, Jimmy, for having me too.
Oh, thanks for showing up and being willing to mentor me yet again.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to pass the floor to Jimmy and Heather. Off we go.
All right, so for today, I thought that really what I wanted to do to sort of give you a brief overview of applying for academic jobs, especially if you're coming from the industry, it can be a really daunting and pretty intimidating task. Applying for jobs as a designer is just done a lot differently than most jobs in higher academia. So mostly because of the difference in the terminal degrees. But there's just a lot of other stuff that you have to think about and you have to consider as you're applying for these jobs that I think a lot of graphic designers just don't know even really where to get started. So I wanted to start by just giving you a brief overview of the process. And then I really wanted to leave a lot of time for more targeted questions or specific questions that people might have based on sort of where they're at in their application journey. So, you know, me and Heather can sort of answer those as we get into that. But I'll run through this. It shouldn't take but maybe 10 or 12 minutes. And hopefully this will jog some questions that you might have. And then we'll open it up from there to just have a really good conversation about this stuff.
Yeah.
So
Can I add one thing really quick?
sure, yeah.
I just wanted to say that, Jimmy and I are aware that we're at maybe larger universities, and that we are not representing the full breadth of, what the lay of the land is. And also, I think these conversations can be challenging and awkward. And I just always like to say, I like to make a space that people can be vulnerable, not feel silly asking questions. I love to ask what things are, like what was the provisional press. So there's no like silly questions. Every sort of lay of the land that we come from is really different, so that people feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I mean, I really came into this whole thing just not knowing anything. And so that was probably one of the reasons why it took me as long as it did to get a teaching job. But I picked up so much information along the way, and there's so little information out there that is helpful for designers coming into higher education that I was just sort of compelled to really start documenting everything that I went through because I wanted to be as helpful as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll run through this presentation, and then hopefully everyone's got as many questions as possible to throw it at me and Heather. So can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, we had great introductions to start, but just to reiterate, I'm an assistant professor of graphic design at Susquehanna. Before that, I was a working graphic designer for 12 years. I came from advertising and in-house work, and I lived the freelance grind. I was your prototypical graphic designer down in North Carolina. When I decided that I wanted to get into teaching, I pursued my MFA at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. I did my undergraduate work at Virginia Tech before that. And then as far as Heather, she graduated from Rhode Island School of Design in 1996. She worked professionally as a brand and UX designer and consultant until 2015. She also taught as an adjunct from 2000 to 2011. And before she started teaching full-time, or then she started teaching full-time at DePaul University in 2015, got her MFA as well, and is on the tenure track, or started on the tenure track at DePaul in 2019. So I just wanted to give you that brief overview because even with very different journeys, me and Heather both survived the application process and found jobs as tenure track professors at very different universities, but we've been through the journey. This is actually me at the end of my 3-year journey applying for jobs and getting ready to sign the contract that I'd been pursuing for so long. So I was really excited. I had more color in my beard then, but the process for me was difficult. It was tough. And I don't like to sugarcoat this process because it is a difficult, long, puzzling, sometimes terrifying, nerve-wracking, frustrating, confusing, daunting process. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the process from my experience. And I really just wanted to share that with everybody because I think a lot of designers go into this blind and they don't always have people to help answer these questions that they may have, especially if they're coming from an industry like advertising or design where maybe they don't have a connection or a network built in academia that can help. And the resources online just truthfully they're not great. There's plenty of resources out there if you want to go be a biology professor or whatever, but coming in as a designer, it's sort of a wasteland out there. And our process is just a little bit different, at least in my experience, it was. So to give you some numbers, over 3 hiring seasons, and I count hiring seasons, it roughly starts in early October, usually goes till about May. So over 3 hiring seasons, I applied to 70 different teaching positions from 2019 to 2022 at roughly 60 different universities, ranging as far west as South Dakota and Montana, as far north as Maine, and as far south as Georgia and Texas. So I literally applied everywhere, and I understand that is a privilege that I had. I had a wife that was willing to pack up and move with me based on where I got a job. Not everyone has that capability. But in my case, I was lucky and that was going to be an option. So I applied at big state schools, R1 research universities, small private schools with 1,000 students. I applied to everything. I had 16 first round interviews. I had 8 on-campus visits, and then I had 6 offers during that time. And I do want to point out and just thank Heather for reviewing every single one of the materials that I eventually sent out to a university. She was an amazing mentor, and I can't thank you enough for giving me your time and experience to help get me to where I ended up getting. So what does this tell us, though? It says that I applied to a lot of jobs. It can take a long time to do that. It involves a lot of rejection. But over time, my numbers got better. My response rate got better from universities and schools. I got more interest as a candidate as my application materials got better every year. I was adapting and refining my application documents every single season. And at the end of every season, I would look at my stuff. I would look at my CV, try and find gaps in skill and knowledge on the CV. And then if I needed to, I would try and fill those gaps. So I wasn't much for the way of UX or web design early on. And so I took courses over the summer to sort of fill those gaps. I got smarter and more deliberate about the places I was applying to based on what type of schools I was actually going to be competitive at, which took a lot of sort of, soul searching to really see where I was strong as a candidate and where I was weaker as a candidate, and understand that I was going to be competitive at smaller liberal arts schools compared to big R1 research universities, because I just didn't have the scholarship to be competitive in some of those positions. So how does this all work? I'm glad you asked. So I figured the best way to do this was going to be to just run through the general process, because if you've only ever applied for design jobs, this is a very different experience. And then I'll give you some tips on managing that. And then I'm kind of hoping we can just open it up and have a conversation and hopefully answer some of the questions you might have with all this stuff. So let's get started with some of the basics. First things first, if you're going to apply for a tenure track position, you're going to need a master's degree. Thankfully, the master's degree is the terminal degree for graphic design positions. So a doctorate is not something I have ever seen as a requirement for any teaching position that I've looked at. But you will need a master's degree. 100% of the positions I looked at required it. So for graphic design professors, again, that's the terminal degree. If you're looking at adjunct positions, though, a bachelor's degree is the highest that I saw as a requirement. So positions that are full-time but aren't tenure track, I've seen both, bachelor's and master's. So, but just plan on getting a master's if you want to pursue a tenure track position. The next thing is, where are you going to find the jobs? So most of these job postings can be found at higheredjobs.com. Indeed has them. College Art Association of America has a lot of jobs posted. The universities will always post on their own career websites. So their .edu websites are going to have them. LinkedIn generally has the same job postings as Indeed. But I found through this whole journey that Higher Ed Jobs tended to be the most consistently updated job board, and it had a pretty clean interface. So it made searching for jobs really easy. The next big piece of advice that I can offer everybody is you need to start a spreadsheet. So I used Excel for this, and I use this to track my job applications. So I still have the one that I used over that 3-year process where I was applying for jobs. And basically I would just list out all the pertinent information for that position. So I'd list the university, the job title as it was posted in the university, in case you have to search for it later. The position, whether it was an adjunct position, lecturer, visiting professor, or tenure track, the location of the university, the date that I applied, where I was at in the process. So whether I'd applied, if I had a first round interview, if the job was filled, if the posting was withdrawn, I tracked all that information. And then I would usually include some notes regarding important things about that place. So whether it was an urban school or rural, the size of the school sometimes, where it was located at, what was around the area, that sort of thing. And then oftentimes I would take a screenshot of the job posting just for easy reference in case I needed to refer back to it later. So when I talk about some of the important things to look at when you are looking at these different positions, you can't just look at the university and be okay with just that amount of information. So this is where you've got to be scholarly and really do your research. So for me, that meant, where's the school located? How big was the town? Are there jobs available if you have a spouse or a partner for them? What are the schools like if you've got kids? Are there activities available that you enjoy? Is it urban or rural? If you're not a city person, you're probably not going to want to apply for a job in the middle of downtown Richmond. So what's the cost of living look like? What's the housing market look like? How expensive is it going to be to live there? I did a Google Street View of every single town and campus as much as I could for every position that I looked at and tracked that information. So when I stress doing your research, you have to do that research to make sure that that job is even remotely going to be a good fit for you. And then you have to get your application materials ready. So obviously the positions that I applied for, I had the materials I needed for those, but I have since looked at over 100 different job postings within the field to just sort of gauge what the materials needed were going to be. And the most common materials that I saw for just about every job posting, you're going to need a CV, which is similar to a resume, but most designers have a CV already. You're going to need a cover letter for every position. A majority of the positions required a diversity, equity, and inclusivity statement. You're going to need a teaching philosophy or artist statement, or sometimes both, but most commonly a teaching philosophy. You're going to need a portfolio of your work. The average number of samples for that was 20. You're going to need a portfolio of your students' work. If you have taught, track and just maintain a record of your students' work for this exact reason. So, and that usually averaged 20 samples. And then you are going to need 3 references at least. I never saw a job posting that didn't ask for at least 3 references with their full contact information. And then the next step, obviously, is you have to start applying. So you need to get your application out everywhere you feel comfortable applying to. So the further that your application net goes, the better your odds are of landing a job. I have found that the East Coast and West Coast jobs tend to have deeper applicant pools compared to sort of the middle of the country. Now, that's based on limited information that I was able to get. I wasn't always able to get how deep the applicant pools were, but I would always ask. Make sure that you target your cover letters to those positions. And I know everyone knows that you should sort of customize a cover letter to your position, but in this case, you really need to customize it. And it takes a long time to write those letters, and you can template parts of it, but you really need to focus on what they are asking for from their candidates, and then figure out whether you're going to be a good fit for that or whether or not you're just not going to be competitive for that based on your skill set. Now, you can always apply. You never know what might happen, but just know that if you are strapped for time, tailor it to the positions that you really want. So figure out how to make your cover letter meet those requirements and really talk to some of those. And then just take the time that you need to write those application materials. I promise that even though it seems like a ton of work, it will pay off in the end. So I wish I could say that once you apply to these jobs, you're going to hear back soon, but you won't. You're going to have to wait. So I found that on average, I would not get a response back from an application for roughly a month. I didn't know why until I actually got a teaching job and got onto my first search committee. Now I fully understand why. So good news or bad, it's going to take longer depending on how early you applied in the process. Generally, you got to wait for the job to close, and then you will get a response back, good or bad, sometimes. So most of these positions are going to have very deep applicant pools, and the search committees move at a glacial pace. So you need to be patient and just wait. I know it's frustrating, but you have to. This is actually a real research or search committee member reviewing applications, so it takes time. So just be patient with that process. And then what? Statistically, this is where the journey ends for most of the positions you're going to apply to. So I wish that it was better than that, but statistically, you're not going to get an interview for some of these positions, and you just have to be willing and ready to accept that rejection. So if you get the good news and they want to interview you, or whether you get the rejection, it's just going to take time to hear back on that. You might not hear back at all. There were plenty of positions that I never heard back from, and that's pretty common. I actually last year I got a notice from a job that they were just informing me that I did not get the position and I had applied for it 3 years before that. So not uncommon for that to happen. Don't hold your breath on some of these positions, but those are just the realities of the situation. But if you don't get the bad news, that means you might land that first round interview. Now, I've seen this go a number of different ways. It could be as quick and easy as a phone call. Almost all of the time, it was a Zoom interview with the search committee. So I've also had search committees have me pre-record answers to questions and send those in. I've had search committees post questions on a screen with all of their cameras turned off, and I would answer them. That was extremely awkward. And I hated processes like that because I like to talk to people. But I've sort of seen it all. If things go really well and you're clicking with the search committee, that's great. You're going to feel really, really good about some of those interviews. Sometimes you just want to turn your camera off and just climb into a hole because the interview just doesn't go well. You're not really, meshing well with the search committee. And that happens too. Fit at these jobs is extremely important. So sometimes you even know that you got an interview. In my case, I got one because I was a veteran and they had to interview me. And I could tell through the body language and the way they were talking that they didn't want to interview me. And so that sort of happens too. Just be prepared for anything and know your materials inside and out. But don't expect feedback. So I reached out to a lot of search committees after I would apply for jobs. I think I got feedback maybe once, maybe one time. And that's honestly because most search committees can't give feedback. So in some states, it's not legal for them to do that. So you can ask, but odds are you won't hear back. And that's honestly what makes this process so frustrating to navigate, is because you don't know if it's because they already had someone in mind, if your materials were not good enough, if you weren't qualified. It could be any number of reasons. And you're just sort of left floating in the ether, wondering if it was you or something that you did or that you could be doing better. And so that's truthfully what made this the hardest for me, is I just never knew what the issue was. So after that, if you did do really well on that first round interview, hopefully you get invited to an on-campus interview. And so that's where you'll have a chance to meet the committee in person. You're going to see the campus. You will probably interview with the dean of the department that you're going to be in, or the school you're going to be in. Probably going to meet with the provost. Every campus interview I had, I met with the dean and provost. Use that time as a chance to see the town. Look at it during the day, look at it at night, sort of explore. If you've got time, you might not, but if you do have time, try and just walk around, drive around, and see what else is going on. Definitely see what's going on around the campus that you're going to be in. So depending on where the campus is located is going to give very different vibes. So just sort of check those out, because this could potentially be a place that you call home. So you want to know if it's going to be a good fit or not. And then if that goes well, then you can hope for an offer. So you got to hope that they are going to be willing to hire you on. And just in some cases, depending on the school, it might not be a good one. And that's okay. So depending on the size of the school or the program, offers can vary widely. So you can get really low offers, you can get really high offers. The benefits can be drastically different. Professional development funds can be drastically different. If you're at a more research-oriented university, these startup funds that you get could be very different. So you need to be patient. If it's not the right job, much like buying a car, you have to be prepared to walk away. And I did that from a number of positions that weren't right for any number of reasons. One place, they just weren't going to have job availability for my wife. Another place, the housing market was through the roof because there just weren't houses available. So other places, the schools weren't right for my kids. And so you have to consider the long-term ramifications of taking a job at a place that you might not be happy at or isn't a good fit for your family. So this could be a place that you work at for 25 or 30 years. So you just need to be prepared to walk away from a job that is not right for you. So, and again, that's why the research sort of comes into this and is really important. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg with all of this stuff. I could go into detail on every single one of these things a lot more, but I would sit here and just talk at you for 2 hours. And so I'm hoping that some of this has sort of sparked some questions that maybe me and Heather can offer more insight into. Just some additional thoughts. I was lucky in the sense that somehow I managed to, sort of worm my way into getting Heather as sort of a mentor through all of this. But if you can find a mentor, find somebody who can review application materials, toss interview questions at you, encourage you if the whole process gets tough, somebody who can sort of walk you through some of the detailed aspects of applying for these jobs. If you're going to grad school, your faculty advisors can be very good for that. My faculty advisors were very helpful, for the most part. And then again, I got lucky and Heather really mentored me through a lot of this stuff. And then the biggest thing, you need to find an outlet for your stress, and you need to find folks that can support you through this whole process. Like I said, there is a lot of rejection in this entire process and a lot of waiting, and that causes stress and anxiety, and you've got to find a way to deal with that. So I have been fairly successful as a designer. I've never dealt with more rejection and professional frustration in my career than I did applying for teaching jobs. I've never been rejected more times than this. So you have to maintain your mental health and look out for yourself going through this entire thing. So with that being said, I sort of just am hoping to open this up to questions and sort of go from there. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen, Victor?
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you. And if you have questions, what we can do for the benefit of the recording, if you can go ahead and raise your virtual hand, and we'll call you. If you don't have a microphone, if you want to just put it in the chat, and then I'll go ahead and read it out. And then either Jimmy and Heather can answer. But I'll go ahead and start if that's okay. I wrote down a few questions that kind of were triggered. And this one is something that you didn't exactly talk about, but I'm just curious because a lot of times in that I've been on both sides, obviously, of the search committee and the hiring process. And one of the things that we often get is a prompt. Once we get invited to the campus, we get a prompt that we have to talk to a group of students about.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I was just wondering if you had any tips about how you can interpret prompts, other than just being taking them at face value, or do you try to put in things about yourself in there that might sweeten the deal for you to get hired in?
I mean, I can say from my experience, I sort of had a couple different experiences with that. Some they were very clear about what they wanted to see me teach. So for my job here, they wanted me to teach a lesson on packaging design, because that was going to be a big part of the course load that I was going to be teaching was a packaging course. So I prepared a lecture specifically for packaging design, as if it was just another day in the classroom and this is what I was teaching. Now I tried to make it as, sort of forefront as I could, more advanced as far as like staying current with technology and emerging tech and packaging, things I thought the students would find interesting. But some other places just wanted me to lecture about my work because they just wanted to see what I was like in front of a group of students. So if they give you a prompt, that's great. Some places didn't, and I sort of had to reach out and say, is there anything specific you want me to talk about, or am I open to sort of lecture on whatever I want? So I was just very blunt about asking for that information. And sometimes they may say, yeah, go ahead and do what you want. And then I just, with that in mind, I go in and just try and wow them as much as I can. And if it works, awesome. If it's not, it just might not be a good fit for who you are and what the school's looking for.
Awesome, thank you. And you seem to be a very organized and spreadsheet kind of guy who follows up on things very well. I'm wondering, in your processes of the ones you didn't get, did you ever happen to investigate or try to find out if maybe an internal candidate? Sometimes it seems like this whole process of being hired is just kind of like something that they have to do when in fact they already know exactly who they're going to hire. Have you ever found that, or did you do any kind of like research as to who actually got hired ultimately?
There were times in the beginning that I would look on their website and see if a new candidate popped up. Truthfully, after seeing that a couple times and sort of dealing with the rejection and seeing somebody else get a position that I wanted, I stopped doing that, mostly for a couple reasons. One, it wasn't going to change anything, and two, it just wasn't good for my mental health. And so I stopped what could have been and focus more on finding the next position that was going to be right for me.
That's very fair. Thank you. Stephen McCarthy, go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
Yeah, hi there. I'm happy to be here today. I would also recommend asking to look at the department's tenure code. So if you're on a tenure track position, the language in that code is going to determine your reappointments, your promotion, your tenure. I've really become familiar with what the process is because it's a contractual kind of binding document.
Yeah.
So being familiar with it, and not just the language, you know, kind of like as a lawyer would read it, but the sort of cultural norms in the department. I was a professor for 31 years. I still do tenure and promotion reviews for other universities. And it's a very interesting process because those that have clear expectations and spell it out and give you a document that you can understand and work with, and that's supportive in terms of its language, is important. And if that's not in place, that would be a big red flag. So I would encourage you all, if you're entering a tenure track position, to become familiar with the tenure code document.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up, and that's where I would sort of file that under like doing your research. Really make sure that you're pulling as much information as you can, because there was a position that I applied for, was listed as tenure track, and I got an offer for. And when I asked about the tenure requirements, they said, well, you know, it could be tenure track. It might not be. I mean, do you want it to be tenure track? And I was like, well, yeah, that's sort of important to me. And they're like, okay, we can make it tenure track. And that was, again, red flag. That was an offer I turned down because it didn't sit right with me. And that's not how it was presented when they posted the job. And so, yeah, it's important for me for a school to be very upfront and clear about what they're hiring to bring you in to do, and what their requirements are for you to move ahead in your career there. You want to go to a place where you can grow.
So that's called a bait and switch.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Coming from advertising, I saw it quite a bit. So.
And we're a newer school. DePaul School Design is only 10 years old. So we've actually been a part of rewriting our tenure and promotion materials several times as we've wanted to attract different faculty, or we felt like something was amiss. I mean, I also can see on this particular Zoom, there's a lot of very senior faculty with a lot of experience, which is nice. But I have also found in my journey that when you reach out to somebody you admire, I've asked a pretty well-known futurist to mentor me more into the future space. People are usually very willing. Some people I know also do it as consulting, and I think it's worth the investment to pay sometimes for help to really launch your career. I think Stephen does this, but it's an investment in you, and also, again, just finding mentors, like finding someone who does what you want to do, and kind of asking them how they got there. I think people are generally pretty great about helping. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Heather.
And I
Thank
did
you,
see
Stephen.
the question from somebody was asking about student work, and what
Saw
I
that.
was going to say is, I used to, before I even adjuncted, I was pretty young. I used to just be a critic. People would ask me to come to their classes. I would also conduct workshops. So I think there are like pretty quick, easier ways to begin to build a portfolio of work. It doesn't even have to be a formal class. You might approach your local AIGA chapter, or IXDA or whatever, and go rogue, and offer to run a workshop and begin to collect samples and kind of document that process. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't have a student portfolio put together, I've noticed across many job postings that they will list on there, they want it if you have it, but in some cases they understand that if you haven't started teaching yet, you're just not going to have those student samples all the time, and they'll let you know if that's okay or not. Now, just know that going in, if you don't have those and they do want to see it, it's going to impact maybe how you score out on a rubric if the search committee's using a rubric or something. So just know that it could have an impact, but again, there's nothing you can do about that until you start teaching, or like Heather said, get some workshops under your belt and figure out ways to get work there.
Thank you. And thank you, Stephen, for your question. And Jason, let's go to you.
helps if I unmute myself. How do you go about determining the salary for a position when they don't have it listed? I
I
mean,
had a lot to say about that.
yeah, I mean,
You want to start, Heather, or you want me to go first?
Let me just say a couple things. I mean, I don't know how accurate Glassdoor is. I do think you can Google
not very.
things. But what I do want to say that you may not know is that academic jobs have a base pay. They also have stipends can be negotiated. They also have research funds that can be negotiated, course releases, sabbaticals. There are many, many things that can be negotiated that you wouldn't know at face value. And I mean, I think I'm a really good negotiator. And I think you need to kind of know what the school is looking for, read their strategic plan, know what is wanted higher up, because ultimately you're usually negotiating with the dean and they'll have this say with the provost of what they can unlock for you. And they can be very sneaky about where to find money for you if they really want you. So I'm sure AIGA knows there's spreadsheets there of what can be paid where, but also know, DePaul, I'm in a school of computing, so we're able to pay a lot more most of the time, I think, than if you're in a school of art.
Yes.
So it's kind of evaluating and it's not all about money, but kind of evaluating the landscape that exists, knowing how to be savvy. There's pros and cons to sort of having a joint appointment, for example, but if you are pretty savvy with UX or you have background in the humanities, I'm sure someone like Stephen can talk about this with Minnesota, like there are ways, and again, pros and cons to sort of finding money also from multiple sources in terms of salary. So not an easy answer, but I would encourage you to dig in and ask some mentors about that and don't just accept, what they give to you. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I found that on average, this is not all small private schools, but on average, the small private schools that I got offers from were much lower than I was expecting them to be. You can try and find or look on Glassdoor and see if they have anything listed, but I found a lot of those to be inaccurate or unrealistic, again, because the humanities positions were not paying as well as something in STEM. So
yeah,
that was sort of the issue that I ran into there. But you have to be willing to negotiate. And again, you have to be willing to walk away from an offer that's just not going to be economically feasible for you. So I had an offer from a school in Georgia that was very low. And they told me that they couldn't negotiate on it because they brought in new faculty all at the same level. And I basically said, that's not my problem. I mean, I have my years of experience that I've accrued that I'm bringing to the table here. And if that's the best you can do, and there's not a job market for my wife to get a job, I can't survive on this salary. So I had to walk. And that's, it's heartbreaking to get that offer and have to say no, but you've got to do what's right for your long-term plan and what's best for you and protect yourself. And taking a job that doesn't pay enough is just going to put way more stress on you in the long run and make it difficult. And you're not going to want to stay.
Yeah,
and I did see some people
recently
put some sort of tables and data in the chart. You can look up the salary anybody makes at a state school, but I also reminder that's just their base. That's not their stipends for chairing or directing. It's not their summer salary. You should always try to negotiate for a summer salary if you can, especially if you're starting a tenure track. So there also, I was at WashU for a little while. They have an amazing program to help you buy a house. So some of the bigger universities have all kinds of things you might not even imagine existed. So yeah.
And then just consider, quality of life too. Like I took a pay cut from my in-house job, which was great benefits, great salary. I took a pay cut from that to come up here and teach. And I've never been happier coming out of that job because it wasn't creatively fulfilling. And for me, like I knew I wanted to teach and it's been a blast. And so, my wife got a job on campus, so it's worked out really well there, but I took a lower salary knowing that my quality of life was going to be better up here, and it has paid off big time. Like I don't even notice the salary difference because I'm just happier.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Good. That's good.
Thank you, Jason. Iram, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you so much for organizing this. It's been super helpful. I'm a PhD candidate, so kind of at the tail end looking into academic jobs. I was curious about, Heather, you're working at the intersection of futures, ethics, emerging tech. Like, how do you go about finding transdisciplinary roles, or maybe roles in
Oh.
transdisciplinary programs that don't have the word design in them? Like, how do you make a case for bringing a design background and experience?
Yeah. That's such a good question. I don't really fit like I don't feel like I fit anywhere, even though both of my degrees are in graphic design. And many people ask why I went to WashU and left. WashU is a wonderful institution with the best people. I was really excited to build a design futures program there, and they were one of the first to sort of make it happen. But like Jimmy, my family really struggled to move to a new place, and we inevitably came back. So I think it's keeping your eyes on people who are doing cutting edge things, building programs. So I have a civics fellowship here, an ethics fellowship. I'm always sort of engaging across the university. Now that I finally submitted my tenure, like I think I'll have the opportunity to actually build a program, maybe, ethics / civics, civic design thing, maybe across the university. So I think it's like, maybe you try to find it, maybe you pepper things into your classes, you certainly find research opportunities, and then hopefully you can try to build it. I'm not shy about reaching out to people to be my friend and my collaborator. So, if someone's doing something cool, I tend to, ask them to play, so to speak. So I don't know if that answers your question. Congratulations on your PhD. That's a whole other, talk AIGA could host, because you will have, I think that degrees are very beautiful in different ways. One of the nice things about the PhD is I think you're a little bit better trained to navigate how higher ed is inherently built, even things like uploading things to Interfolio, for example. But you'll even have better access to grants because some require that you have a PhD. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
I saw a question in the chat that sort of jumped out at me. Lester asked, with years of professional experience, do positions in academia look for teaching experience, and does ageism play a role in hiring? I'll be very transparent. I don't know if ageism does or not. Now, the reason I wanted to answer that question is because I had a lot of years of professional experience, and I thought that would carry me into a position quickly. And I don't think that it did. I don't think it carried as much weight as I wanted until I found the right position. So the place that I'm teaching at now, the job posting for it was like, I felt like it was custom tailored to me. I actually wasn't going to apply for a smaller school, and my wife found it. And she was like, you need to apply for this position because it is written for you. Because they were looking for someone with professional experience. Other places are looking for teaching experience. They're looking for certain types of scholarship or research that you're doing. And, based on the search committees that I've been on now, the rubrics can weigh those things, differently. So a lot of that's sort of a mystery, how much experience is going to play into making you a competitive candidate or not. So it just really depends on the universities that you're applying to and what they're looking for. So really try and parse through that job posting, see if it's a good fit based on what they're emphasizing in there. But again, it's never going to hurt to have great professional experience, but at the same time, it may not help you as much as you might think going into this process. So I hope that answers that.
I'm going to add a little bit to that, which is DePaul is considered, I don't know if the Carnegie rankings are really a thing anymore. I keep hearing something different, but considered an R2. Parts of the university are closer to an R1 based on how much funding they bring in, but really consider themselves a teaching university, which means we do look at teaching. If you apply for a job here, and by the way, we are going to have an open line this year for an assistant or associate professor for anyone who wants to come work with me. So we do require you to do a teaching demo and you show work. However, if we think someone has tremendous promise in areas of research, we will consider them. I think a lot of R1 universities aren't as focused on teaching, especially if the role is, has a large research expectation. I had also interviewed at SAIC and been offered a job there, and they have a much larger teaching component. You don't do a lot of research there. You're teaching 18 to 20 hours a week. So it's just very, very different amounts of labor, where you spend your labor. So
Yeah, and I think that's going to sort of determine, you know, how competitive you're going to be for that position too. Like if you're teaching focused and you have teaching experience, it's going to look good on your application.
Yeah.
If you've got cutting edge, you know, research in the world of design, with less teaching experience, I think a research university is going to probably weigh that a little more heavily too. So, you know, again, you got to do your research, and I'm going to keep hammering that home. Got to do your research and see what type of university you're applying to.
And I think about that too, because again, I'm at DePaul, which doesn't have like a crazy amazing reputation. I think it's decent. But again, our design is situated in a school of computing. So that has forced me to have tremendous breadth and rigor because I'm within computer science. And so, you know, I also taught at RISD, I also taught at WashU, and here it feels incredibly hard. I feel like I have to represent myself in so many different ways to so many different people, as artist, as researcher, you know, with papers, with citations, but also exhibits. And so kind of, again, digging into where the school you're in lays within the realm of a particular institution, I think can be really, really important too. Yeah. Bye, Allie.
Thank you, Heather. James, before I get to your question, Natalie had a comment really quick. Can you all clarify school classifications? I know that's something I didn't learn about until I was in grad school and we were having that discussion.
Oh, I think I brought that up. So I don't actually know if I can clarify it very accurately, but so schools are kind of, you know, they're called R1, R2, or teaching university, and I believe it's based on how much funding they bring in. So you'll hear somebody say, hey, we just got designated an R1, which means, you know, like my daughter goes to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, that is an R1. So, you know, they're just bringing in a certain amount of funding. A school like RISD, where I went to undergrad, I think is considered a teaching institution, but they're an art school, so they sort of float in this other space. Maybe Stephen, or again, some of the other very senior faculty who are here can speak to that a little bit as well. No pressure.
Sure, real quick, I'll say there is actually one higher distinction beyond R1. It's R1 VH. So it's you know, research institution with a very high, you know, productivity rate. You know, counted through impact factors and journal publications, books, Nobel Prizes, you know, Pulitzers, all those sorts of things. So yeah, the emphasis tends to be at those schools, you know, teaching, you know, at Minnesota, I taught 2 courses a semester. When I was at Northern Kentucky University, I taught 3. Some faculty at smaller schools teach 4 courses a semester. So the lighter load means there's a higher expectation for research productivity, and they'll be looking at your publications, exhibits, you know, things that are primarily juried, peer reviewed, and so on. So yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. And James, I appreciate your patience. Go ahead.
James, you're muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
This is a little bit of a tricky question, but I know that as a faculty member, I've been teaching abroad in Korea, but as a faculty member, and Jimmy, you kind of mentioned it, culture and also chemistry and relationships are very important. Like, I think one of the reasons why the searches take so long is that there's assessment of someone you're potentially working with like the rest of your life, right? At least 10, 20, 30 years. So I understand the need to assess from the school and the programs, but is there any advice on kind of making contact with faculty at a program you're interested in working or applied for before or during the search to get a feel of what the culture is like, especially if because I know that it gets really dicey if that person is on the search committee or what the conversations are like around an active posting, what anyone's experience.
I have a little bit to say about that. I mean, Jimmy has applied to jobs at places I've been, you know, being on search committees. I try to be as ethical as possible, whether I'm a candidate or I've been on like 9 hiring committees at this point, like quite a lot. But I've also done things like, you know, if I knew I wanted to apply for a job, but I might be late, I would say, I intend to apply for this. I just want to let you know it's coming. Do you have any, you know, flexibility on the submission date? Or, hey, I have questions about this job. Is there someone there or on the committee I can talk to? Because it might be logistics or, and so I've had luck kind of asking, but, you know, I guess I tread, because it is a big deal, but I also tread carefully, right, to be in compliance and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that so there were a number of times where, you know, oftentimes in the job posting, they'll post at the bottom, if you have any questions, contact, you know, whoever the head of the search committee is. And there were times where I would reach out to the head of the search committee and just to get some general information. That's how I always sort of like, you know, explained why I was emailing, was I just wanted some more general information on, you know, the program and sort of the focus and things like that. Sometimes people got back to me and you could sort of gauge, you know, how personable they were going to be based on those responses. I didn't always hear back. But you know, I have found that if you reach out to a random professor at the department and just want to talk to them, and they're not on that search committee, or you're not looking
Yeah,
to
that's
talk to them about a job posting, I think most of them would be willing to talk. I know I have a number of times, and people that I have reached out to just randomly at other schools just to ask them about what their design program is like, were always more than willing to talk to me about their program. And then if anything opened up there, you know, I would just, again, I'd sort of track it in a spreadsheet, like these are schools that I might potentially be interested in if a position opens up. And so I would just keep my eyes peeled during hiring season to see if those posted, or just go on their website, their school websites, to see if jobs were posting. And then I already had a feel for it. So again, it just comes down to research and seeing if anyone's willing to sort of talk to you, but you just kind of have to be willing to reach out and talk to people, or at least send that email and see if they'll get back to you. So
Yeah. And I
sort of
think
how I approach that.
I know, like, at least James, for me, because I can live in a lot of different spaces, sometimes I'll look at a job, not now, I'm like done with that. I'll be looking at a job and think, this is like interdisciplinary media arts, or it's UXD, or it's futures. Could I fit there? Like, what's this department about? And so, you know, I do diligence, like poke around the people that work there, read the school strategic plan to see what's happening, or maybe Google somebody's work. But I know what you mean. It's like you can only kind of figure out so much. So then maybe you do reach out to somebody to kind of get an idea of what that program's really about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to approach it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also part of my question was sort of like, what is the nature of networking in academia, and
yeah.
how because I know that, like, especially for a higher ed arts, my brother was on a like recently got hired somewhere, but that school had a track record in the past 2 or 3 years of a lot of canceled searches due to some like insidery sort of like transitions from like visiting to full-time kind of positions. So I'm kind of aware that a lot of that culture is trying to be fixed in a lot of schools. So I'm
Yeah, I
curious
was an internal candidate 3 times at DePaul, because I went from being a full-time term faculty, sometimes that's called like a professor of practice, into a tenure track. So kind of sucks for the school, because they've hired you into a new role, but then they have to fill your old role. This is like all kinds of nonsense like that. That's weird. Sometimes I put this in the chat, a role is actually written for a specific person. I don't know if that's really supposed to do that, but I know it happens. So it can be for an internal candidate or someone they're trying to attract. The position is literally crafted so that person, when they apply, are like a perfect fit for it. So just know, like, that goes on too. And failed searches. So, you know, you can be amazing and apply for a job and go through the rubric, and either they don't have enough candidates, or, you know, they just decide, yeah, it's not a strong search, or, you know, it just didn't align with whatever. So we have failed a lot of searches too. So, and it's a lot of work. And then to fail a search, let me tell you.
Yeah, and
So,
I will point out, just because you mentioned it when you were talking about sort of postings maybe being custom tailored to like a specific candidate too. Like I found a number of postings when I was going through this where they were very specific about the research that they wanted a candidate to have experience or be strong in, that I knew I was not that candidate. And so some of those I just moved on from. I was like, I'm not going to spend the 2.5 hours to get this packet together because I'm not going to get that call, you know? So you got to be willing to, again, this is one of those examples where you got to humble yourself, understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, and understand that not every job position that's posted is going to be one that you are going to be a strong candidate for, and recognizing those signs as you read through the postings and knowing what's going to work and what's not. You can get hints if they have an internal candidate because of the way they write those postings. They're oddly specific.
You can kind of tell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny too, like, you know, I was internal at DePaul and then asked to apply for a tenure track, and it seemed like I would get the role, but then I didn't have a terminal degree. I didn't get the role. I was going to leave. I stayed here. I ended up applying for a tenure track, getting a master's degree, went to WashU, came back to DePaul. My friends not in academia were like, wow, DePaul just gave you your job back. I was like, if only. No, I had to reapply for my job, you know, which is like in academia, I think that's incredibly rare. So I feel like I can share that amongst my academic friends who understand how ridiculous that is, because we exist in this really onerous and archaic process. So,
and
yeah,
you did mention networking too, James, and I want to say that you know, as far as like networking goes, the designers and the sort of design world that I came from professionally, like there was almost no overlap between my academic network and my professional design network. And that was difficult for me at first because I didn't really know who to turn to get help.
yeah.
One of the benefits of this is needing an MFA means you got to go to grad school, which is where you start that network. And so there were cases where not only was I networking through my professors, you know, grad school advisors and my colleagues in cohort, but I could also use that opportunity to reach out to them specifically if there was somebody that they knew that they could possibly introduce me to. And so I would reach out, and I've done that before too. Hey, you know, I really appreciate this other professor's research they're doing. Any chance you could, you know, drop my name in front of them and see if they're willing to take an email? And so that's sort of how I slowly grew my network, but I'm still growing my network. When I first started teaching here at Susquehanna, my wife works in payroll. Everybody knew her on campus before they knew me. I was just her husband for the first year I was here. Like,
That's so
a bunch of people
funny.
didn't even know I was teaching here. So it takes a while to grow that network. I mean, you've been doing this longer than me, James, but yeah, I still feel like I'm still growing that network. So.
Thank you, James. We have about time for one more question. Anyone want to ask a question, or if there's a question in the chat that we want to cover or talk about?
Yeah,
And
I mean, the chat is making me realize like another session that could be had is like negotiating, right? Like, how do you negotiate your first tenure track? What do you ask for a course release and prove you need to work on some research? I think Ting had a lot of great comments in there about, you know, how do you advocate for these things and why you need them? You need internal money because you need seed money because you're going to go for external grants. There's like a language to the negotiations too, that again, really comes from, I think, more of the PhD world. And there are some PhDs on here that maybe offer a little like how to be savvy session. I feel grateful for the many people in my world who have kind of coached me to understand that better. Yeah.
Well,
I think that's a great idea for a future event. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
like
sorry,
for an hour, like I mean, I spent 3 years doing this, and I've got, you know, thousands of words written on this. Like an hour is just not enough to go through all of this stuff that goes into applying for these teaching jobs. And so I do want to say I'm adding my email to the chat. So if anybody has more questions after this, if they want to follow up, if they want me to review any materials that they have or have questions or whatever, please email me. Because again, there's just not enough information out there, and I'm trying to be a helpful source for people that are trying to navigate this because it's difficult. It is. So if I can be part of part of the solution here, I would love to do that.
Yeah. I was gonna suggest a couple more things just really quickly too, which again, I mentioned DePaul is going to have a line coming up. If you're interested in asking about the culture here, no committee yet, you can reach out to me and kind of ask about Chicago. I'm also a chair for Design Incubation, and Jess Barnes and I run the Designing Your Research Agenda series. We have one coming up in November. We try to have faculty from a range of full professor to just starting out. They show their research trajectories. They talk about the ebbs and flows, hardships, good things. I think Tashika presented that at one point. So please keep your eyes out for that too. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I tend to share a lot of great opportunities there as well. And hopefully those things are helpful. But I feel funny saying this because there's so many senior faculty and very experienced people here. So it's nice to have them in dialogue also. But yeah.
Do we have time for one more question? Michael had a question in the chat.
Let's do it.
That's
Let's
a
do it,
good
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
The dangling carrot.
As an adjunct, how do you avoid the department dangling the full-time carrot and not get taken advantage of? I wish there was a good answer for this, but I have a number of colleagues and friends of mine who've had that carrot dangled in front of them forever. And I asked somebody one time, you know, why they think that happens. And he flat out told me, because they've already got you. And they can go find somebody else for the full-time position. They don't need to bring you into it because they've already got you as an adjunct. And so they'll, you know, as hurtful as that is, I think I read somewhere that if you adjunct at a place for 8 years, the odds of you getting a job are basically slim to none.
Or if you're, or if
university.
you're a full-time term faculty, they say you often won't get a tenure track. I would like to change that culture. I think it's really
would too.
silly. I think if an adjunct has been committed to your school and done amazing work and you know them, in my mind, they should be an exceptional candidate and well considered. But there's this
100%.
weird snobbery, elitism. I don't even know what it is, but I try to like unlearn and think to myself, why is the system this way? I want to think of it differently, right? So I think there's an opportunity in that too. Rethink the hiring process.
I think it's terrible practice because you've got a good candidate right there. You know them better than anyone. So I think it's ridiculous, but you know, those are the realities of some universities. It's shameful, but that's how they operate.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Stephen got his hand up.
Yeah, real quick on that. And I put this into the chat. A lot of adjuncts actually rise up through the ranks by doing their graduate degree in the department, and they get hired on, they stay on, and then 5 years later they're still there. And so to be a proponent for not hiring such an internal kind of an adjunct, because then you risk having sort of a intellectual inbreeding, so doing an outside.
That's true. That is true.
To bring in fresh ideas and fresh, different education, different life experiences, and so on. So, with my own experience with former graduate students or adjuncts in my department, I encourage them to. In fact, they'll even look better to other institutions. They'll look more shiny, more interesting, more relevant. To go outside of their own home university.
Yeah.
That is a really good point. Yeah,
it is a really good point, because if you've ever done hiring training, they say, hey, you're going to be drawn to hire people you get along with and hire people that are like you. But that's actually not necessarily well intended, because it just means you're hiring more of the same and you're not going to be very diverse. And we're a research institution, an educational institution. You want to have very diverse thoughts. So Stephen raises a good point.
Yeah, sides to every coin. It's just nuanced. Unique to almost every situation. So it's a valid point though.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I think that's a great point to end on. I'd like to thank both Heather and Jimmy for an amazing conversation. It almost feels like we might need to organize a part 2 of this somewhere along the road. And Jimmy, I think your email got pushed up to the chat, right? You put it in there somewhere, but Heather,
do you want me to throw it back in there again?
Oh yeah.
I think both of them are in there. So if you want to reach out, go ahead and ask them direct questions. You can also view this video again. We're going to be putting it in on our YouTube channels, along with some other talks, including Katie reminded me earlier, there is a virtual event we had about negotiations, salary negotiations.
Oh, there is. Nice. Well. Okay, that's great.
That's great.
That's great.
but I mean, maybe we have to do another one of those, and yeah. So
There can probably never be enough of those.
right.
That's true. Yeah, very
Yeah.
true.
So thank you both. I appreciate you both, and thank you all for joining us on your Friday afternoons. We'll be doing more of these, so make sure you check out the AIGA DEC Instagram and get on the emailer, and anybody from the comms team want to kind of put that information on there if they haven't already. But otherwise, have a great rest of your Friday and have a wonderful weekend. Be brave, be bold. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.